Hello Internet, welcome back to my channel, Global Issues Simplified, where I try to take a simplified view out of complex global issues for easy discussions. So if you are doing a project in the school or just want to understand a gist of certain ongoing global issues so that you can make some cool points in a friendly debate, then you are in the right place. Today I have thought of discussing a topic which I believe has never received the same amount of attention than other topics. Most of the people are probably aware about the issue in some way or the other, but can barely comprehend the enormity of the situation, and that includes me. The issue is there for many decades, but in recent years, the problem is getting much worse and out of hand due to multiple factors. I'm talking about the food crisis in the African continent. Food shortage or food insecurity is not a new problem and has long been a disturbing situation that is suffered by millions of Africans for decades. In the late 1960s, 1 million people died of starvation in Nigeria due to the Biafran War. In the late 1970s, food shortages and hunger in Ethiopia, triggered by a natural disaster, costed the lives of another 1 million Africans. These occurrences continued throughout the 80s and the 90s, and only in the past decade and a half, the number of people living in extreme starvation finally began decreasing. But the food insecurity has taken a new dimension now. To put it into perspective, roughly 278 million people in Africa suffer from chronic hunger. This corresponds to 20% of the continent's population as reported by Welt Hunger Hilfe, a well-recognized German non-profit organization. As you can see in the World Hunger Index map of 2021, created by Statista based on the survey by the German organization, the situation is particularly dire in Somalia, with 7 other countries rated as very serious: Chad, the Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan, Burundi, the Central African Republic, the Comoros, and the Madagascar. Only a handful of countries can be classified as low or moderate on the severity scale. Although there are multitudes of reasons for this crisis, there are 2 important reasons that have contributed heavily, especially for the current food shortages in the African countries. The first and foremost reason can be attributed to changing climatic conditions. Those of us who are privileged enough not to get impacted by climate change in our day-to-day life debate about the impact of climate change, and if there is a possible conspiracy theory behind it, sitting in our comfortable homes. According to the Notre Dame Global Adaptation Index, which measures countries' vulnerability due to climate change, 16 countries out of the 20 nations ranked as most vulnerable due to climate change are African. Let me share an example of the vast impact of climate change faced by the African nations. As you can see in this figure, which I have borrowed from a writer's article shared in the link below, the eastern part of Africa has been hit by 4 consecutive years of drought. As per the article, some 22 million people across Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia face high levels of acute food insecurity solely due to drought, a number projected to rise up to 26 million by February 2023 if the rains again fail. While rainfall deficit plays havoc in the eastern parts of West Africa have been hit by flooding after the most intense rainfall in 30 years. By mid-October 2022, 5 million people and 1 million hectares of farmland were affected, according to a report made by the World Food Programme. In Chad, over 19,000 head of livestock were swept away after rivers broke their banks, and in neighboring Nigeria, flooding has hit 29 of the 36 states. As the climate change makes these abnormal climatic shocks more frequent, longer, and severe, the food shortages due to complete washout of crops due to floods or no crops due to drought will also become more frequent and severely tipping these countries to a point where there is not enough food to feed themselves, and the only way is to import food from other countries. If the weather shocks were bad, the food crisis was exacerbated by many folds due to the negative economic effect of COVID-19. The COVID-19 left Africa facing the strongest economic headwinds in years, according to the International Monetary Fund or the IMF. After years of borrowing, countries are now struggling to service their debts. According to the IMF, 19 of sub-Saharan Africa's 35 low-income countries are now in distressed debts, where a government is either unable to or at a high risk of failing to fulfill its financial obligations, and debt restructuring is required. As mentioned in one of the 2022 IMF article, since the food production in Africa is weather sensitive and inconsistent, 85% of the food is imported from other countries. The inability to service the debt has made the currencies weak, which has in turn increased the import bill for food items, flaring up the inflation. The graph from IMF exactly depicts the situation. According to IMF, food expenses constitute 40% of household consumer spending in sub-Saharan Africa, which is the highest share in the world. In the Western Hemisphere, higher food prices often mean that families can forgo luxuries yet can maintain a proper, if not always healthy diet. However, in Africa, where some of the poorest people in the world reside, higher food prices mean that many will not be able to afford even one decent meal a day. With a visible food crisis in sight, millions will be in danger of malnutrition and extreme poverty. On top of the reasons that I had just mentioned, the Russia-Ukraine conflict in Europe has brought in even more challenges. The World Food Programme, which depends on humanitarian aids from wealthier governments, are now struggling to meet the need as European countries have cut aid in Africa. European countries contributed about 21% of humanitarian relief aid to Africa in 2022, which is down by 16 percentage points since 2018. The UN and Turkey brokered a deal in July 2022 to unblock 3 Black Sea ports to supply grains to the world, which led to 615 vessels leaving the Ukrainian ports between August 1st and December 13th, 2022, carrying over 13.5 million tons of corn, wheat, rapeseed and sunflower oil. Out of these 600 plus ships, only 11 ships were destined for sub-Saharan Africa. It is indeed sad to see this continent that has about 60 to 65% of arable land is struggling to feed itself. Is there a solution to this dire situation? A lot of the NGOs and researchers are working on different issues to solve the problem. One solution that they have found is investing in building irrigation infrastructure to reduce dependency of climate. A writer's article reports that 65% of Africa's land is considered degraded due to unsustainable farming. Studies show that the adoption of Zai-pit technique, in which a mixture of soil and manure is placed in small pits in degraded lands, led to increased soil fertility, decreased soil erosion, and increased crop yields. At the end, stronger political will, regional cross-border cooperation among African nations, and financial support are urgently required to end this human suffering once and for all, and to bring Africa, in Nelson Mandela's own words, and Africa where there is work, bread, water and salt for all. I would like to thank various online sources for creating such interesting infographics, and I'll be sharing the links below for you to go through if you want to know more about the topic. I hope that you liked the video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. It will motivate me to bring more such simplified views to you. Also, do write in the comments what other global issues you are interested in so that I can make videos on it. See you next time. Be well. Peace.